the designer behind Untitled Thoughts, which is a sustainable pattern design brand. I'm so excited to be bringing you today's tutorial, which is the Amélie Sew-Along. The Amélie Sew-Along is divided up into two parts. The first part, we're going to be tackling the bodice of the dress, and in the second part, we're going to be doing the skirt and attaching it to the dress and finishing it up. I'm super excited to be bringing you all this tutorial today. This is one of my favorite dresses that I've ever designed, and it was actually the first dress of my pattern brand that I launched officially under Untitled Thoughts. The Amélie dress has quite a few different options, including an open back design, a bra-friendly back design, tons of buttons. It's got two different skirt options, two different sleeve options. I mean, the options are totally endless. It's so much fun, and it's got such a big skirt, and you can really twirl in it and get a lot of volume. So I hope that you all enjoy this tutorial. I really tried to spend some time in the trickier parts to get as detailed of a shot as I could. I think that it's one of the best designs because once you finish it, it feels like all of the effort was completely worth it. So I hope you enjoy. All right, it's time to get started. So what I like to do before each project is make sure that I have everything that I'm going to need laid out in front of me. Right here, I have everything that I can think of at this moment, including all of my pre-cut pieces that have been labeled as well. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do is to take your front and back bodice pieces and stay stitch both the neckline and the back opening. Then we're going to go ahead and transfer any of our markings onto our pattern pieces, including the darts and button position. I'm also going to label the wrong side of my fabric since both sides kind of look the same. And I'm going to do this for all of my pattern pieces, front and back. The next thing we're going to do is attach our interfacing, and if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I really love using muslin fabric as sew-in interfacing, and I have a tutorial for that which I'll link to here. Now it's time to move on to sewing our darts, and what I like to do is actually mark the dart with a straight ruler and piece of chalk, connecting the leg of the dart to the point of the dart. And I'm going to do this on all of my darts, both on the main fabric and on my lining fabric. And you can use tailor's chalk or a Frixion pen or anything that can be erased later on. Once all of our darts have been marked, it's time to pin them together, matching up the new markings or the legs and the point. So you're basically creating little triangles for your darts. And what I like to do is pin all of my darts at once, except for on the center front darts. I only pin one dart because they do meet at a point in the same spot at the center front bodice. And then I'm going to just go ahead and do the lining fabric as well in the same manner before taking it over to my sewing machine to sew. Now, when sewing darts, it's best to not backstitch at the end point. This creates a really pointy dart, which a lot of people don't actually like. So you just want to leave like a nice long thread. Next up, it's time to press the darts, and I like doing this over a ham, but before we do that, it's best to tie off the loose threads and snip them, and then we're going to press our center back darts towards the center back, and I like to go over both sides just to make sure it's nice and smooth, and then repeat with all of the other bodice pieces. So I'm tying off all the darts and then snipping those excess threads before pressing my darts. So for the center front darts, they're being pressed towards the side seams, and the underarm darts are being pressed down. And then I'm just going to repeat this with the remaining pattern pieces that I have, including my lining pieces. Now that all of our darts have been pressed, it's time to pin them down at the edges, the raw edges, and baste them into place. So I'm just going to take a few pins and pin them. And then using a basting stitch, I'm going to baste these closed. And I'm going to do that with all of my darts. Now that everything's basted, it's time to pin the front to the back bodice at the shoulder seams. And then sew these closed along with the lining pieces as well. Once the shoulders have been sewn, it's time to press them open. Before we move on to the next step, now is a great time to actually attach a tag, if you want, to your lining piece. So I am just putting in this little tag that I have, making sure it's not too close to the buttonhole, and I'm just sewing it down all around. Flat tags work best for this particular pattern as they won't irritate your skin. And look at how cute it turned out. And now it's time to attach the lining piece to the main bodice piece. So I'm matching up my shoulder seams and just pinning all around the neckline as well as the open back. If you're working with the other back option, you're going to do the exact same thing. It's just going to look a little bit different. As I'm sewing, you might notice that I am actually reinforcing my corner points with a couple of back stitches before I pivot my fabric. And this is because we're going to cut into this later on, and I really like to make sure that it's nice and strong with some extra stitches. Now it's time to clip our corners. This really helps that for us when we turn out our garment, it looks nice and sharp on the other side and there's not too much bulk. And then we're also going to go ahead and make little triangular notches all around the collar or the neckline. This also helps our curve to lie flatter against the body than if you did not cut little clips in this. Here's just a close-up of what I meant by reinforcing the corner stitches. So I've just done extra stitches right here at the corner so it's nice and strong. Now it's time to flip our bodice pieces right side out. So this next step is a little bit tricky, especially if you've never understitched a garment before. Basically, what understitching is sewing the lining pieces to the seam allowance right along the edge of our garment. And this concept actually took me a really long time to figure out. Understitching did not come naturally to me at all. But what it does is it actually hides our lining underneath our garment when we're wearing it so that it doesn't peek out. So I'm at my machine and here's the seam allowance. I'm going to fold over my lining piece just like this, and I'm going to put my garment underneath my sewing foot, lowering it. And I'm actually going to move my needle all the way to one edge so that I can get as close of a line of stitching along the edge of my lining piece. And then I'm just going to sew. And for this garment, we're just going to sew as far as we possibly can until we hit a place where the fabric gets too bunchy, which is right around the area of where the buttonhole is going to go. So this takes a lot of finagling and it looks a little weird in the camera, but you're basically just going to sew until you feel like you can't sew anymore. And once you hit that point, you're going to backstitch and then completely remove your thread and needle, cut it, and then you're going to start on the other side all over again. Again, this might take a little bit of finagling, and you can go as slow as you want. Really make sure that you're not catching any threads or fabrics on the other side. And then once you've got your rhythm, just keep on going. And here's what the understitching looks like up close. As you can see on the front face of the fabric, there is no line of stitching, but on the back lining, there's this neat little line, and you can hardly see the lining peeking out from underneath. So just giving this a nice little press. I love this part. It always makes the whole garment look super crisp. Now it's time to baste our armholes together. So I'm matching up the notches and my shoulder seams and just pinning everything together for both armholes. And then we're going to baste these armholes together just so that they don't move for the next step. If you find that your lining is peeking out a little bit from your armhole, that's totally normal. Just go ahead and trim off any of the excess. Now onto the sleeves. So for this pattern, I did include underarm gussets. And what these gussets do is actually, it helps to increase the amount of mobility that you have in your arms when you're moving in these sleeves because they are fitted. This is a totally optional part, but if you want more mobility, then I highly recommend sewing in the gussets. If you are sewing in the gussets, it's best to finish the outer curved edges of each of your gusset pieces, the entire cap of your sleeve, and the armhole of your bodice pieces. If you're not sewing in the gussets, you can totally skip this part, but look at how clean everything looks. It's all ready to be put together. So to start, we're going to attach our gussets to our sleeves one at a time, working with the front gusset first, just attaching the gusset, matching up the notches. So I'm going to start at one end and then just pin, pin, pin until I reach the little dot pieces and they're matched up. And if you need to use lots of pins for this part, that's totally understandable. This is two really sharp curves coming in together. When sewing the gussets, you want to make sure that you're sewing from the side seam, the underarm side seam, through to the dot, and then stopping and back stitching at that point, and then clipping your threads. We don't want to sew all the way through our gusset piece because it does have to be attached to our armhole. Now that all of our gussets are sewn into place, as you can see, I sewed straight to the dot, and there is a little overhanging flap right here, which will allow me to sew my sleeve onto the armhole later on, and I did it for both sides. Next up, I'm going to mark where I'll be sewing the 2 lines of basting stitches to ease in the sleeve to the armhole, I suggest marking 2 inches on either side of the top notch and sewing between those 2 points 2 lines of gathering stitches. Once you have both lines of gathering stitches sewn in, take your bobbin thread and gently pull it until you have a little bit of easing in the cap. You don't want too much, we're not creating gathers. Then it's time to pin the sleeve to the armhole, matching up all of the notches, any of the dots if you sewed the gussets, and pinning into place. I like to use a lot of pins on my sleeves, especially this one in particular because I hadn't put in a long enough gathering stitch for the sleeve cap. But if you find that there are lots of little bubbles in your sleeve, then this is the best solution, is to just use a lot of pins to really ease in all of that excess fabric. And if you did decide to do the gussets, what I suggest is pinning on either side of that seam allowance right at the dot, because what we're going to do is sew up through to the dot. We're going to back stitch, snip our thread, and then come to the other side of the seam allowance and sew all the way through the cap to the other dot and repeat with the final gusset. And this just increases the amount of mobility that the sleeve has to offer. So I'm sewing up through to the dot, back stitching, snipping my thread, and then coming on the other seam allowance side and sewing all the way through the sleeve cap. And I'm not gonna lie, this is the only time I ever leave my pins in my sewing machine, and I sew really slowly through the sleeve cap. And it's just because I want to make sure that the easing stays in the right place. Once both sleeves have been attached, go ahead and remove any basting stitches that you can actually see on the other side, and then press your sleeve seam allowance towards the sleeve cap. This is just going to help it to lay nice and smooth. Then we're going to pin from our underarm sleeve all the way through to the waist at the side seams and sew these 2 pieces together. I pinned open all of my gusset seam allowances just to reduce the amount of bulk. And go ahead and finish your seams as well in whatever your preferred method might be. I'm just using serger thread because that's what I happen to have on hand, and my fabric has been fraying ridiculously. Finally, go ahead and press your sleeve hem up twice at 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeters and stitch it into place. I failed to capture a full video of myself doing that, so we're just going to pop right in to doing our waistband, pinning together the interface waistband piece with the interface waistband piece at the short edges, and then doing the same for the non-interfaced waistband, and then sewing along these edges. Once they're sewn, bring them over to your ironing board and press those seam allowances open. Then take your non-interfaced waistband piece and along the bottom edge, press it up 1/2 inch. You'll know it's the bottom edge because it has 2 notches at the center front. Now we're going to sandwich our bodice in between our 2 waistband pieces, making sure that the interfaced waistband is touching the front side of the bodice. And you're just going to pin, making sure that you match all of the seam allowances, any notches. Starting at 1 dot, So all the way through your waistband, pivoting at any corners and going until you hit the final dot on the opposite side. Then clip your corners and grade your waistband seam to help reduce the amount of bulk. This will help your garment to feel more comfortable while wearing. Finally, turn out your waistband pieces and poke out the little corners. You can use a chopstick again if you like, and then press your waistband to give it a nice, smooth, sharp edge. And finally, top stitch all around your waistband except for the bottom raw edge. So you're gonna go again from one dot all the way through to the next dot. And you're done. Well, at least with the bodice. So that's it for part 1 of the Amélie Sew-Along. I hope that you enjoyed sewing along with me today, and I promise to get part 2 up as soon as possible. If you like this video, feel free to subscribe and like it below. I hope to bring you all more tutorials like this soon, as well as some of my other sewing adventures, gardening adventures, things like that. If there's anything that you'd like to see, feel free to pop it in the comments. And if there's anything that I can improve, let me know. I want to make these tutorials as fun and as accessible as I possibly can. You just love being in all the videos, huh?